Toxic positivity in any game community is like a disease which slowly infects games across the world. It's had its most effectiveness against already crippled games such as Team Fortress 2. But wait a minute, I don't want this video to be another one of those TF2 is dying or TF2's toxic videos, as toxic positivity is a very unique problem as opposed to normal toxicity. And this is something I've hardly seen get brought up properly by other people. You might be wondering what the difference even is between the so-called toxic positivity and just normal positivity. If you guessed it's because of the toxic part, you'd be half right, since I'm talking about the type of toxicity where you get hated on for simply raising awareness or having concern about very real problems in the game or its community. For example, let's say that Valve adds really subpar submissions from the workshop into the game, and you feel like venting your frustrations about it online. Do you think that would justify people attacking you simply because you expressed your opinion? No, of course not. Yet this actually happens. And for whatever reason, there's been a vocal minority of people who act like all of us should be satisfied with the way Valve treats Team Fortress 2. With the whole, we should be happy we get anything at all mentality that has been noticeably apparent since 2020. I don't know why it happens, as I can only really make educated assumptions based on evidence. But one of the biggest reasons why I believe toxic positivity has started to infect TF2 discourse more than other game communities is simply because Team Fortress 2 is a victim of Valve's neglect over the years, with its community nowadays being a shell of its former self. Remember when TF2's public sphere was filled with people who weren't afraid to speak their mind publicly? We had people like Muzelk in 2016 who would happily talk about the issues the game had if it meant Valve might listen and improve the game. However, Valve hasn't done that in years, and everyone's painfully aware of how apathetic Valve has become towards Team Fortress 2, which is likely the reason why there hasn't been nearly enough people willing to talk about the game's major flaws, like matchmaking or free-to-plays still being muted. However, this doesn't mean that we should shut up about these issues either, or even worse, attack people who think this way and defend Valve. Naturally, when there's less and less people willing to point out issues about the game, the whole vocal minority of bootlickers start to become louder, causing the rest of the community to be in this weird sort of limbo of online discourse, where there's people trying to justify the things Valve does and ostracize others who dare say anything bad about the multi-billion-dollar company. I won't lie to you when I say that at some point when I was younger, I adored Valve and thought they were different from other game companies. However, this hasn't been the truth for a long time, and they are far worse than other game companies in a multitude of ways. I used to be the type of person who would defend Valve whenever any criticism was thrown towards them and TF2. To give you an example, if someone said, TF2's been left to rot by Valve and hasn't received a real update in a decade, I'd talk about the very minor things Valve recently has done for TF2, or spit out the classic excuse of, oh, you know, once Valve finishes work on their games, they might finally give TF2 some developers. I know there's still many people out there who think like this, and this is exactly what Valve wants. They won't listen to player feedback and give the majority of people what they want if it means they won't make millions in the easiest way possible, or if they think they know better. This has been proven many times over the course of TF2's update history, and even in other Valve titles like CS2. These examples being both Meet Your Match for TF2 and CSGO's transition to Source 2. You can have an entire stadium's worth of players screaming at Valve to not do something, and criticism out the wazoo, but all of that won't matter so long as there's still a large crowd of loyal fans cheering Valve on. And when this happens, you can almost guarantee that whatever new loot crate update Valve sloppily implements will make millions of dollars, and be eaten up by the same loyal fans who cheered Valve on. Predatory loot crate gambling is Valve's specialty after all, and they've only perfected the skill ever since the release of TF2's Man Economy update.
Factory new, incoming. I called it right here.
Oh my god!
Valve are far from being saints, even for game company standards, yet people still treat them like they're different from the rest, simply because they made good games decades ago. Despite the fact that they put in the least possible effort for the older live service games and treat their player base like a joke. Need I remind you that it took an entire angry mob of gamers and a horrible PR for Valve to finally step in and implement a solution to the bots after 8 years of them running rampant in casual game servers. A solution which only was possible thanks to one contractor's work that took 2 years to develop. Valve themselves have proven countless times that they don't care about Team Fortress 2, so long as it rakes in millions of dollars each year. Start to take away that revenue, and you'll start to see how Valve time becomes a thing of the past. As evident by how quickly Valve jumped back onto TF2 to fix a game-breaking bug involving unusual crates in 2019. But wait, what about the arguably even worse problem affecting the game on a global scale? Well, you see, Valve are too stretched thin on other projects to fix it. Sorry, many people in the TF2 community continue to bargain with Valve by downplaying their actions while at the same time defending them from people who talk negatively about the game. A whole subculture of bootlicking and only focusing on every little good thing Valve has done for the game has always been here since the beginning, but only in recent times has it been slowly becoming a more mainstream way of thinking, as it's like people nowadays find it hard to criticize a multi-billion-dollar company and bring up negative problems the game has. There also seems to be a sort of prisoner's dilemma situation surrounding negative discourse for the game as well. Everyone wants there to be someone who calls this stuff out, but no one wants to be the one to do so. And when this becomes a norm, shocker, nothing will get done. When it's a universally acceptable thing to call Valve out for, like the bots, it's incredibly easy to regurgitate the same talking points as everyone else. But you'd be hard-pressed to find any public figure nowadays in the TF2 community willing to speak up about less socially acceptable problems, like the matchmaking system, or the other countless problems the game has. It's almost as if people are trying to turn a blind eye to Valve, while at the same time praising them for any crumbs they give us. Both discussions for fixed TF2, but more so quick play, have been great examples of this, and have put in perspective how much toxic positivity has really poisoned the game's discourse. I've seen people downplaying issues like the bots or casual matchmaking by simply saying that it's not that bad, or by justifying it and saying that the game still at least works, in an attempt to minimize Valve's wrongdoings and make everyone else seem like they're overreacting and complaining. It's just baffling to me how much of TF2's audience have been conditioned by Valve to adopt this backwards thinking style of, we should be thankful we get anything at all. No matter which way you slice it, this simply just isn't a healthy mindset to have at all. I don't know about you guys, but if a company constantly backstabbed me and downgraded the game I played, I wouldn't go out of my way to make sure they're okay from trolling comments online. It's almost as if some TF2 players are in this weird delusion that if we keep giving Valve what they want and stay loyal, we'll get rewarded. If you've seen the current direction the game is going and how Valve feels towards the game, you'll know that this is never going to happen. It's one thing to rally for an objectively good improvement for the game, but a totally other thing to believe that bargaining and acting loyal to Valve for support is going to work. We've seen how kindly asking for things goes, and at this point, are left with no choice but to vote with our wallets and force Valve into a position to act. I'm not going to let a comic get in the way of all this and win me over, especially just from seeing how much Valve has purposely sabotaged Team Fortress 2. The whole "we don't deserve anything from Valve" mindset that many outsiders for TF2, but also some TF2 fans adopt, is really ridiculous the more you think about it. The whole argument falls apart at the seams if you apply it to any other live service game on the market, and really just makes it sound like players should be grateful for any scraps Valve gives us, and to compromise instead of expecting actual support and decent updates. At the end of the day, most of these excuses come from people who want to justify their continued support for Valve, even when Valve doesn't care about them, with all of this being a weird mix of Stockholm Syndrome, denial, and simply a lack of awareness. Most people would be surprised if I told them that Valve isn't the same company that it was in 2013, and that Valve has completely new higher-ups managing the company, none of them being the same ones who brought us the Orange Box. This information, however, has been buried over time, and as new generations of players come and go, important details surrounding Valve and TF2's development fade into obscurity. I do not want people to simply forgive everything Valve has done, especially when the impact of these decisions are still felt till this day. So how about I just remind you all that the current Valve aren't the same company that they were 20 years ago, using real, tangible evidence. "2013 was the last year that we had the caring version of Valve that people still think of whenever the name is brought up. As in 2013, Valve made the decision to switch from being a game company to being more of a hardware and game platform. This transition was known as the Great Cleansing to Valve employees, and this was the first time Valve ever did a layoff to this magnitude. But it was for a very important reason. This decision had to be made if Valve wanted to improve their company for the long term and make more money. When making this transition, there was bound to be some collateral damage along the way. Artists, writers, and developers from the teams that gave us the Orange Box and other beloved Valve titles were all fired, and the very few employees that remained from the original Team Fortress 2 team were moved on to other projects and given far less control in the game. Robin Walker, the person who co-created and designed Team Fortress Quake, and subsequently every other branch for Team Fortress, was reallocated to work on other Valve titles such as Dota 2 and Half-Life Alyx. More people need to be aware of the fact that a majority of the developers that made Team Fortress 2 simply don't work for Valve anymore, and haven't for over a decade at this point. The only developers who are lucky or unlucky enough to remain on Team Fortress 2 simply don't have the ability to do anything remotely substantial to it now. One of the current developers for the game, Eric Smith, who was responsible for the seasonal updates and who was a part of the Team Fortress 2 development team from 2007, loves the game, as he probably could tell. But as much as he would want to drastically improve the game for the better, it's not like he's in any type of position to do so. And apart from the occasional bug fix or optimization for the base game, it's not like Eric or any developer from the original team for TF2 still working at Valve have any power to steer the game in a better direction without the approval of Valve. I doubt most of the original dev team for the game would have even wanted the game to go the direction it went. As a matter of fact, the closest we've ever gone to an original Team Fortress 2 developer is when they referred to TF2's art style as evolving. But if someone like Robin Walker was able to work on the game, he would, but he's simply in no position to do so, as after all, every decision for TF2 has to be passed through Valve. The CEOs and the higher-ups at Valve are the only ones who can decide whether or not they want to support Team Fortress 2, so why don't they? Simply put, Valve wants to keep Team Fortress 2 in this limbo state for as long as possible, as it's the only option they have if they want to maintain this facade that they care about their players and their older IPs. But it's also to keep every other Valve microeconomy afloat with the least amount of effort. Remember that each Valve microeconomy ties into each other in one way or another. And imagine, if you will, what would happen when one of these million-dollar microeconomies vanish. The sheer panic that would ensue for every other Valve microeconomy and even other game economies outside of Valve would be far more destructive than any boycott for the game could ever be. Valve doesn't keep this game alive because they love the game. In fact, they keep it alive simply out of necessity. I'm sure in a perfect world, they would have shut this game down as soon as they had the chance, but they can't. In their eyes, they don't see any value in supporting Team Fortress 2, aside from the occasional maintenance update and game patch. It doesn't rake in the billions of dollars that Dota and CS2 bring. It doesn't have a thriving esports scene, and most importantly, doesn't have a player base even remotely close to those of CS2 and Dota 2. So what's the point in wasting company time on a game that'll never take off to the same degree as the other big titles? You might have noticed this when they slowly eased off the gas over the years and went more and more hands-off for TF2, switching to more community-oriented updates as soon as they realized the community will do all the heavy lifting. Right when Valve was finished putting band-aids on an already flawed system and trying to salvage what was left from their matchmaking update in 2016, any and all active developer support ceased, even including more community-oriented events like the Saxies. They let the community themselves pick up the pieces right when things started to turn out badly for them, and couldn't even do the courtesy of sticking to the community contest that they used to do since 2011, or even check in every now and then and prove that they were still there for their player base. The reputation that Valve made for themselves was really starting to fall apart, especially when you consider that they can do barely the bare minimum effort for a live service game like Team Fortress 2, and can't even make good games anymore. Of course, whether or not something is good or not is subjective, but when I say a Valve game is bad, I'm referring in the sense that it's bad for their standards. Sure, a game like Artifact will be classified as decent if it came from a smaller game studio, but we're talking about Valve here, and there's no way you could say with a straight face that Artifact is good when it came from the same people that made Portal. Besides the games using already existing franchises like Half-Life or Portal, Valve really hasn't been making much impressive stuff over the years since 2013, as we've got games like Artifact and Deadlock, games which completely strayed away from the original Valve game design philosophy of being something that defined a genre or pushed the limits of what could be done in a video game. Games like Deadlock or Artifact simply weren't what the general player base for Valve wanted, nor were the type of games that initially gave Valve the reputation of being the studio that makes innovative masterpieces. Artifact in 2018 was a signal to Valve players that something was up. But Deadlock was Valve doubling down on this new game style, and the sign that Valve were not going back to making original, innovative masterpieces that they did 15 years ago. Simply put, the Valve that we once knew was gone, and most of the people that made up Valve back in the day haven't even been in the company for over 10 years at this point. Yet Valve still keeps up the facade that they're the same old lovable game company that makes good games, when they clearly shifted to become a more corporate hardware company and haven't even made good games in recent years. So why do people treat them differently from the other companies? Well, I guess when you made genre-defining masterpieces back in the day, people will continue to hold you up to a high status over different companies, and some people who supported Valve for so long want to try to continue to justify the support and still believe that they haven't changed. The truth hurts, and if anything, this new blog post for the TF2 SDK release to me just seems like Valve's throwing in the towel and letting the community update the game themselves. Now don't get me wrong, I think more mod support is great, but most of TF2's audience play the main game, and unless there's a reason for them to switch to player-created mods, they'll just continue playing the base game. People still need to remember to hold Valve accountable for what they did to Team Fortress 2. Despite the horrible state TF2 is in right now, the silver lining in all of this is that the game isn't ruined to the point of near unplayability and can still be salvaged with an easy matchmaking system revert that will take less than a day to do, as all the code for quick play is still there, just buried within the code for the game. But I want you, the viewer, to just think about this for a moment. If you go out of your way to shut down any criticism towards the game and attack others who criticize the game, you need to take a step back and look at who you're fighting for. Any person who willingly goes out their way to shut down meaningful, healthy discussion for the game is either living in some distant pirate land with rose-tinted goggles on, or simply just aren't a true fan for the game. I've learned over the years that a majority of the people who watch and enjoy TF2 content don't play the game at all, but it wouldn't really matter to them as the game is just a passing interest for most people. Healthy discourse surrounding the game is one of the only ways for the game to receive positive changes, and when you start to take away that discussion, that's the moment that TF2 is going to start bleeding players and return to a neglected state. That's what toxic positivity does, and it's one of the many silent killers that the game is encountering right now.